Frank Robinson looked like a man who had been through a lot but never lost his taste for life. Despite his age, he was still a strong man with a sharp mind and a firm grip. When he first saw Monica in a small, shabby diner on the outskirts of the city, she was like a breath of fresh air. Young, energetic, with long blonde hair framing her beautiful face, she smiled at him as she served coffee, and every move she made felt like a promise of something more. Frank became a regular at the place, and soon they began talking. At first, it was small talk about the weather and how boring life in a small town could be. But soon their conversations turned more personal. "I've always dreamed of leaving this place," Monica admitted one day when they were almost alone in the diner. "But it seems like I'm stuck here." Frank nodded, thoughtfully swirling the coffee in his cup. "What if I could help you make your dream come true?" he unexpectedly offered. Monica raised an eyebrow, surprised by his directness. She laughed, but there was a sparkle in her eyes. "You think I could manage that?" Frank smiled back, and from that day on, their relationship developed rapidly. After just a few months, they were standing in a small church on the edge of town. Frank looked at his young wife, and his heart swelled with pride and joy. He gave her everything he could: expensive necklaces, designer dresses, and finally, a brand new shiny Tesla, which became their latest purchase. But happiness didn't last long. 6 months later, Frank noticed that Monica had begun to distance herself from him. Her cheerful laugh was heard less often, and she frequently went out on her errands, spending only a few hours at home. One evening, as Frank sat in his office, looking out the window at the empty road where her car usually stood, he started thinking. Monica had been saying far too often that the Tesla was breaking down. "Another day at the car shop?" he asked her one evening over dinner. Monica smiled nervously and shook her head. "Yes. Problems with the coolant. I had to get everything replaced so it would run properly." Frank froze. Coolant? In an electric car? His mind, always sharp and analytical, immediately realized something was off. He didn't continue the conversation, but suspicions already took root in his mind. The next day, Frank went to an old acquaintance, Jack Marlowe, a private detective he had trusted for many years. "Listen, Jack," Frank said as he entered the small office, "I need you to follow my wife. I think she's hiding something from me." Jack nodded briefly, jotting down the details, and asked, "Do you want the truth?" Frank stood silently for a moment, looking out the window, then resolutely clasped his hands and said, "I always choose the truth, Jack." A week later, Jack returned with news. "You were right, Frank. Your wife isn't repairing her car. She's seeing a mechanic. They spend time together in his workshop while you think she's waiting for the car to be fixed." Frank nodded in silence. It hurt, but he wasn't going to show it. He was old, but not foolish. Frank returned home and began to act. That evening, when Monica came back, he met her at the door with a broad smile. "How are you, darling?" he asked gently. Monica, suddenly feeling a bit uneasy about his kindness, mumbled something, but Frank didn't give her time to think. "I have a surprise for you," he announced. "Let's go to your favorite restaurant and celebrate." Monica, of course, didn't object. Over dinner, Frank decided to strike where it would hurt the most. "I've been thinking. You deserve more than just being my wife. You're young, beautiful, and I want to give you freedom." "Freedom?" she asked, not understanding what he meant. "Yes, you've always wanted to be independent, right? To live life the way you want? I'm giving you the house and the car. You can live however you wish." Monica was stunned. She couldn't believe it would be that easy. Just a few weeks ago, she had been dreaming of this, and now her heart was racing with excitement. At last, she would be free. The next day, Frank really did leave, handing over the keys to the house and car to his wife. But what followed was something she hadn't expected. All the bank accounts were frozen, her credit cards were blocked, and the house suddenly turned out to be mortgaged. Monica lost everything. When she called her lover, the mechanic Joe, he met her with a dry tone. "You're out of money?" he asked mockingly. "Then why would I need you?" The blow was crushing. In desperation, she returned home, but there she was greeted by Frank's lawyer. "Mrs. Robinson, my client left you some documents. You need to vacate the house by the end of the week." Completely defeated, Monica returned to where her story had begun, back to the same diner where she once again put on an apron and served coffee to new customers. As for Frank, a few months later, he married his housemaid, a quiet, caring woman who always looked at him with admiration. One day, driving past the diner, he caught a glimpse of Monica standing behind the counter. Their eyes met briefly, but she didn't say a word. He smiled to himself, satisfied that justice had been served.